Hey everybody, in this video I will be going briefly over where we're going in terms of your next paper and then also describing kind of a critical tool that we'll be using to look at and analyze some rhetorical arguments. So today you will need some note-taking materials, and that's very much, again, to get in that kinesthetic sense in your learning. It will be useful to you, I think, to just take a few notes. And that way you can just take what's useful to you and leave the rest. So our next big project is a rhetorical analysis. So this is a textual analysis. You'll be analyzing an essay, a piece of writing. And this is going to help you with several skills that are essential to your success in this course. Understanding and summarizing texts of different modes and genres, identifying different parts of that text, and building meaning from the ways those parts come together or don't. This essentially means, being able to break down a text into its constituent parts, being able to recognize what those parts are and how they work together, and then also recognizing sort of where they break down or where they don't make the point that they're trying to make, or where they get close but they fail. So that's the sort of the structure and the tools that we will be kind of learning from this. We've talked a lot about kind of metacognition and metacognitive skills. This project is going to focus kind of on three skills and processes. The first is observation, which really refers to, again, being very conscious and being very critical as we move through the world. So being an effective reader and writer really means paying attention to the world around you. So when you're looking at an ad or you're reading a piece, you're not just absorbing it at face value. You're looking at the way it's structured and the arguments that you're making, and you're able to judge for yourself kind of how valuable it is rather than just blindly absorbing. So this also increases your ability to focus on a single text. So we are doing a really deep dive into just one text for this project. So this is going to really help you understand how to do that, how to build a whole paper out of just one kind of concept or set of arguments. So then the second thing is, argument. This analysis requires you to make an argumentative thesis. So you'll do a couple of different drafts of this thesis, and you'll also develop it by providing evidence and argumentation and building evidence for your claims. And then finally, this is going to help you with process, which, just like in the last paper, effective writing is very, very rarely accomplished without multiple drafts, without revisions. So we will be doing multiple revisions of this paper. So this is just going to be an essay that makes an analytical argument about a chosen text. I will give you a list of texts that you can work with. I will give you that by the end of the week. But you will want to use one of these kind of options that I give you. On the assignment sheet, there's a suggested list of steps to work through. I will at some point upload an extra reference video that walks you through those steps. But because we're not there yet, it's not super important. And the last thing, your analysis will not include very many sources beyond the piece that you're analyzing. This is not a research paper. This is a deep dive into a single text. So you will rely very much on your own knowledge and your own processes and the skills that we are using in this unit. If you do need to include some kind of context or background information, you may find it useful to include an extra source or two, but please remember that if you do use additional sources, you must cite them. Unless whatever it is that you're working with is considered sort of common knowledge or common sense, you must cite whatever source you use in your paper. It's just an issue of academic honesty. So today we're going to be talking about visual rhetoric a lot, mostly because it is a way to grasp Frith's levels of analysis in a way that's very easy. So what we're going to do in this video is talk about the analytical process and visual rhetoric, and I'll give you some examples in a second video. So first of all, visual rhetoric, if rhetoric is sort of the ability to be persuasive, visual rhetoric is just the art of being persuasive in a visual space. Now, throughout history, humans are extremely visual kind of creatures. We've always sort of used visual rhetoric either to celebrate or to persuade or to make records. So from, the cave paintings at Lascaux, those were keeping records, telling stories, celebrating the success of the hunt. Think about the way that cuneiform emerged out of pictograms, which were just pictures that were used to communicate. So again, that's a visual form. Think about how in the Middle Ages, the stained glass of cathedrals was meant to tell stories and to convince viewers of the truth of the Christian stories. And then sort of, throughout history, we have always kind of taken advantage of this. Now, in the modern era, we live in a very visually dominated world. Even though we are very literate now, we are even more visually aligned than we've ever been. We are surrounded by screens all the time. We see billboards everywhere. We watch movies. We see advertisements, posters. We can't get away from this visual rhetoric. We're not all kind of subsistence farming in a potato field somewhere. We are always looking at images. And because of that, we need to be able to read and dissect and produce effective visuals. We need to be able to look at these visuals, this visual rhetoric, and understand what it's trying to do, how it's trying to do it, if we can trust it, and then to be able to produce effective visuals of our own so that we can be visually convincing. So visual rhetoric includes several elements. The use of images as an argument. So again, the argument is made out of the images rather than out of words. The arrangement of elements on a page. What do you look at first? What do you look at second? What do you look at third? What's even there to look at in the first place? The use of typography. So often visual rhetoric has accompanying text, and that text can also tell us a lot about the piece and its priorities. For example, the font that I'm using on this slide is very plain font. Now, it's kind of boring, but it's also easy to read. If it was like a very fancy cursive font, you would think that maybe I was trying to tell you something fancy. And then a font like Comic Sans may imply that something is childish or related to children. So typography really matters. Typography is the visual aspect of written language, and it matters. So then the final piece is the analysis of existing images and visuals. So in addition to just kind of what is out there, visual rhetoric is also analyzing what is out there. So again, we're talking about visual rhetoric because it's the easiest way to enter into talking about Frith's levels of analysis. We will be doing a little bit more visual analysis as we continue through the next couple of weeks because there is so much overlap between doing visual rhetoric and then textual rhetoric. And finally, I just want to remind you that visual rhetoric also includes those major rhetorical appeals, ethos, logos, pathos. It also requires that you have that rhetorical situation, speaker, message, audience. So it uses all of the same tools as written rhetoric. It just does so in a visual space rather than in a written space. So Catherine Frith was a professor who studied cultural meaning in advertising. She believed the viewers should be able to see through advertising in order to decode the underlying messages that reveal cultural details or priorities. Now, this feels kind of boring and obvious to us these days, but when Catherine Frith was working, this was in an era when we weren't as bombarded with images all the time, and we hadn't really taken a lot of time to think about how those images were being intentionally or even unintentionally constructed to reflect or promote certain cultural values and ideas. So it used to be, people would make advertisements, and those advertisements had certain appeals in them, but viewers didn't really think critically about them in the way that we're kind of all trained to do today. So it feels a little bit redundant and a little bit almost condescending for me to talk about like, oh, she thought that we should be able to look at the underlying messages in advertising. But, you can get a media studies degree now. You can get an advertising degree now. That wasn't always the case. As a global society, we are just much more primed to pay attention to this kind of thing. And Catherine Frith sort of paved the way for us to be able to do that. So she believed that an advertisement not only informs us about a product, service, or call to action, but gives meaning to what those things represent culturally. For example, an advertisement for sneakers is also a cultural signifier for the kind of person who would wear them, and it's also a commentary on that person's cultural values themselves. So it tells us about sort of, fashion appeal, visual appeal, what this person kind of finds a priority in their life. So for example, I don't really wear a lot of sneakers or a lot of boots, flats, hiking boots, that kind of thing. But my brother-in-law wears sneakers. And so when he goes to buy a new pair of sneakers, he is doing so conscious of the aesthetic value of them. He's conscious of the visual appeal of the place that sneakers hold in the fashion world. Meanwhile, when I go out to buy like a new pair of hiking boots, the advertising that I will receive is focused on like, oh, you're buying hiking boots, so, you must be the kind of person who enjoys the outdoors. You must be the kind of person who likes getting physical exercise. And then that is a commentary on my personal values, but also on sort of some underlying cultural values, which is that, exercise is important. We all have the desire to kind of feel good in our bodies and making maybe we all want to enjoy the natural world maybe. And so that's just kind of an example of these different levels. So let's look at them individually now. Frith's 3 levels of analysis are the surface meaning, the advertiser's intended meaning, and the cultural or ideological meaning. So the surface meaning is the overall impression that the reader gets from quickly studying the advertisement. This is all the people, things, colors, text, stuff in the advertisement. So the surface meaning is literally just a summary. You're not doing any analysis yet. It's just a summary of what you see. What's everything that you see on this page? What is everything that you see kind of in this advertisement? You're just describing what's there, not making any analysis, no interpretation. So the second part is where that interpretation does begin. It's the advertiser's intended meaning. Now, this is the sales message. This is the brand strategy. This is the message that the advertiser wants you to take. So again, this is where like products and services are often associated with certain lifestyles. Like if you get kind of like fancy, fast sports car tires, that's associated with a different lifestyle than getting like big, rugged kind of dirt road truck tires, right? We make different kinds of cultural or social or preferential associations with those 2 different products in the same way that we may have 2 different associations with hiking boots or sneakers. So finally, we have the cultural and ideological meaning, and this is how we make sense of ads by relating them to our cultural experiences. These are these sort of foundational or common sense notions in our society. These are also these sort of basic appeals to things that every person feels, right? Everyone wants to feel safe. Everyone feels hungry. Everyone desires companionship. So these are these 15 basic appeals, and I'm going to give you a list of those 15 appeals. So this would be sort of like, buying a new pair of sneakers meets your basic human appeal for physical safety and security, right? You want to wear shoes. But buying one pair of sneakers over another may also, depending on how the ad is framed, if it's like, oh, these are the cool sneakers, everybody's going to think you're cool. What this gets at is the underlying desire to be accepted by one's peers. Buying a pair of hiking boots may get at the underlying desire for a sense of freedom or a sense of adventure, depending on, again, how the advertisement is framed. So in the next video, we're going to go over how these levels function in visual senses, and then later we'll talk about how they function in a textual sense. So see ya at the next video.